Camilla Tominey on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. Welcome to The Point with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Racist, sexist, homophobic, broken. That's the devastating verdict of the report into the Metropolitan Police. Is it any longer fit for purpose?
And our former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is on trial, effectively. He was accused of eating cake in lockdown, but do you care? It's reported that he's ready to make a comeback if he's cleared by this inquiry.
And that man, Donald Trump, yeah, he's in the news. He could well be arrested today. Can you imagine the ramifications if he is? Police forces across the country are preparing for unrest in case that happens. We'll bring you the latest on all of that throughout the show.
And in a GB News exclusive, we've spoken to one of the three men who were falsely accused of rape by Eleanor Williams. His name is Mohammed Ramzan. You do not want to miss that.
And as ever, let us know your thoughts on all our talking points today. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
First of all, though, let's get our latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB Newsroom at 9:32. A scathing report into Britain's largest police force has found it to be institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. Baroness Louise Casey led the review into the Metropolitan Police. She's warning victims have been let down and that officers who abuse their power have shattered public trust in the force. The report found the Met's current ethics standards and disciplinary procedures have failed abysmally, and Baroness Casey is calling for a complete overhaul of the force.
The moment that Sarah Everard was raped, abducted, raped and then murdered by a serving police officer, I find it extraordinary that in policing and in the Met Police, that wasn't their moment of like a plane falling out of the sky. I just think it is so dreadful. Change didn't come. So now this report has to carry that and has to take responsibility for getting the change needed.
The sister of a head teacher who took her own life after an Ofsted inspection says her death was a direct result of the deeply harmful report and the pressure of the process. Ruth Perry was the head at Caversham Primary School in Reading. She killed herself in January while awaiting the review, which gave the school the lowest possible rating. The inspection report found the school to be good in every category, apart from leadership and management, where it was judged to be inadequate. The Transport Secretary is calling on the RMT union to give its members a vote on the latest pay offer from rail operators so next week's strikes can be called off. It's after members of the union who work for Network Rail accepted a similar pay rise of between 9.2% and 14.4%. Industrial action is planned by the RMT for next Thursday and Saturday, but Mark Harper is urging them to call it off. TV, online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Well, it's about as damning as it could possibly be. That's the report into the Metropolitan Police. All those years after the Macpherson report said it was institutionally racist, it's now still institutionally racist. Add to that, institutionally misogynistic and homophobic.
So Baroness Louise Casey's independent review has also called the force rotten, adding that she couldn't guarantee there aren't more officers like Wayne Couzens and David Carrick amongst the ranks.
So the Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, says progress was being made to reform the Met. He would say that, wouldn't he? Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Accepting her language in terms of the bullets of the diagnosis of what we've got wrong. I'm just simply not wrapping it up in the same label. We are going to be anti-racist, anti-misogynist, anti-homophobic. I've stepped up massively our capability in our professional standards department. Our men and women in the organisation are reporting more incidents. We are sacking officers at a faster rate because of their help. So we are making the progress that people would expect us to do. It's going to take us some time, but we are slowly reducing the risk that we have people in the organisation who don't have the integrity the public would expect.
Well, that was a deeply underwhelming Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley. But we can speak now to Shabnam Chowdhury, former Detective Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police. Good morning to you. Can I just read you a couple of things directly from the report? A female officer who reported being raped by a colleague who was then forced to work alongside him, junior staff being urinated on in the showers, gay officers crossing the street to avoid colleagues, a Muslim officer having bacon pushed into his boots, a Sikh member of staff whose boss thought it would be funny to chop off his beard, and so it goes on. It's devastating, isn't it?
It's heartbreakingly devastating. I read the report late last night. I didn't sleep very well. I cried when I read some case studies. I'm looking at and listening to what you're saying. It actually beggars belief. And it made my journey within policing seem somewhat insignificant in terms of what some of these officers are having to endure in today's society, where policing should have got so much better post the Macpherson recommendations that were made after the murder of Stephen Lawrence. The police service has gone back 20 steps and it has not moved forward. I'm really saddened by that.
Swaggering male macho culture. Isn't that the problem here?
It's a male macho culture, it's poor leadership, it's systemic failings across the organisation, it's the inability to be criticised, it's defending the indefensible, it's embedding a culture to support your officers and to defend them at any cost. And that is absolutely why the Metropolitan Police is in the mess that it is currently sits in right now.
We're talking about all of these incidents, Shabnam. There are multiple, as Andrew's just read out. But these incidents only happen because individuals allow them to happen. Individuals are also perpetrating, but they're also somebody at some point within the police is not stopping these issues in their tracks, in those individual police forces and departments. Why is that?
Well, there's a few things I would say. For starters, when you're a whistleblower and you try to speak out, you very, very quickly find yourself isolated. You find yourself being victimised. You find yourself being intimidated by officers. You find just ranks being closed around you. There's an inability by leaders within the organisation, managers, to fail to actually deal with these issues because they're too scared of their own career progressions. I speak through experience. I'm a whistleblower from 1999. Yes, I reached the rank of superintendent. People will say, well, she's done so well. Yes, I did do great, but my career and my journey was tarnished as a result of that. So I understand how police officers feel that are now trying to speak out. And I would also add, there are good officers out there that try to support those that do speak out, but they also find themselves in a position where they've been targeted by managers. I'm appalled by what I'm reading. I'm also utterly disappointed in Sir Mark Rowley this morning saying he doesn't want to acknowledge the label institutional. Baroness Casey has taken the time to uncover every stone within policing, to label the Metropolitan Police institutionally racist, sexist, misogynistic and homophobic. And yet Sir Mark Rowley says, I don't want to use that label. Let's not forget the former Commissioner, Cressida Dick, also said, I don't recognise that label. That's not a good start for policing, because actually what he needs to do is listen to what the report said, and the report's telling him that, accept it, draw a line under it and start continuing to do what it is, in fairness, that he has already started to do. But I think in denial already is not a good start.
The report also talks about eye-watering force on suspects. And the thing that probably made my jaw drop again, quite often fridges would break down in which very important evidence had been contained, which meant the evidence was contaminated and no longer fit for purpose. It sounds like something out of the Keystone Cops.
Well, you know, I'm not overly shocked by some of the stuff that I'm hearing in terms of how the investigations take place. I mean, for example, they talk about rape victims that come forward, and you've got female officers who have been undermined by their male colleagues within that same area of policing, trying to discredit victims by fishing for evidence to actually discredit them. And then you've got a male officer who gives an example, how is this a rape, and then goes through a whole scenario with a female officer as if he was the perpetrator and she was the victim. Absolutely disgusting behaviour by serving officers. I keep hearing people saying, you know, the vast majority of policing is good, and there are some fantastic officers out there. But this report isn't about the fantastic officers. This is about the poor policing, the rotten bad apples within policing that have now got to be rooted out. We've been here before. We've been here for 30 years. We've been here for all the decades that I was in policing. I was subjected to similar type of behaviours, denied opportunities, undermined in certain areas, constantly told that I need development every time I applied for promotion. I had more development than a Kodak camera, and I totally get where some of these officers are coming from. That hasn't changed. And the culture within the policing, within the Metropolitan Police, is going to be the hardest thing for policing to actually change.
How will those good police officers feel this morning, Shabnam, going into work and knowing that the media, family, friends are all talking about this report?
Look, I've had text messages over the last few days. I've had text messages this morning, female officers, male officers that I've worked with in the past years who are really, really upset, who feel ashamed to be police officers, who said that I'm so proud to have been coming into policing, but right now I feel that, you know, perhaps I should be leaving. But the bottom line is, any officer that is worth their salt will sit there and actually reflect on this and not be sitting there trying to defend policing in the way that many officers will still try to do so. Austerity had a big impact on this, but you cannot blame behaviours on austerity. Policing has allowed bad, rotten apples into policing because of the fact that they lacked, their vetting processes were poor, and as a result of that, you've got shed loads of police officers coming in, and you've got those that are already embedded into the culture, the Carricks and the Cousins of the world. These aren't officers that have just come into policing. They had 18 to 20 years serving and ruling the roost, and you've got to now start dig deep as managers to now start calling this out, because it's going to reflect further on you.
OK, thank you. Shabnam Chowdhury there, former Detective Superintendent at the Met.
Well, the political development today, the DUP, that's in Northern Ireland, said it's not going to support a key part of Rishi Sunak's Windsor Framework deal, which was supposed to have finally sorted out Brexit.
I know. When I heard this late last night, my heart sunk. MPs are going to be given a chance to vote on the so-called Stormont break on Wednesday, but DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said the party had unanimously agreed to vote against it.
Well, joining us in the studio is Ben Habib, who was, of course, a Brexit Party MEP, and he was at that great press conference yesterday with Reform UK.
I called you a hero on the telly yesterday, Ben.
You were called and you were there along with Anne Widdecombe and 9 other former MPs. You've joined Reform UK to try and get a proper Brexit. I wrote about this so-called Stormont break in the Daily Mail. This is what Rishi Sunak negotiated, so that if there's something that the British government or they don't like in Northern Ireland that the EU's proposing, they can literally apply a break. But it isn't quite what it seems, is it? Because if the EU, it can only be used in exceptional circumstances, only if the EU says so. And, by the way, if it does get applied, the EU can then whack us for compensation.
And that's the key point. You can pull the brake with great difficulty. Stormont, you've got to have 30 MLAs in Stormont to pull the brake. Then you rely on His Majesty's government to do the right thing. And assuming they do it, which is rare, the EU has the ability to impose sanctions on Northern Ireland. What kind of break is that? You exercise it using your democratic rights, and the EU undermines you by imposing sanctions on you. That's no break at all. And the only reason they're having the vote on it in Parliament tomorrow is because it's actually not a variation to the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's a variation to the Belfast Agreement that they wish to make. And they're tinkering again with the peace process, the peace settlement, that they so wrap themselves up in when they try and justify the protocol. But of course, as we know, their protocol and the Windsor Framework drives a coach and horses through the Belfast Agreement. So they need to vary it to get what they want. I mean, the whole thing, by the way, it's quite interesting, Andrew, that tomorrow Boris Johnson is up in front of the Privileges Committee for misleading Parliament. Well, the way this Windsor Framework has been described to Parliament, it is a fundamental deception.
Yes, you just beat me to it, Ben. That was what I was going to say, because it was greeted as a triumph.
As a new deal.
Sold to us as something fresh and shiny and new, and Rishi Sunak had solved the problem.
Absolutely, and it isn't. And by definition it isn't, and I can say that with 100% certainty, because this new agreement, this new version of the protocol, I should say, emerges from the joint committee formed by the withdrawal agreement. The joint committee is a committee of British representatives and EU representatives, and they have no right or ability to change the withdrawal agreement of which the protocol is part. So this is just bells and whistles trying to, as ever, put masking tape over a really fundamental root and branches sort of problem that they need to sort out.
People watching this and listening to this, Ben, might think, oh, this is all so technical, Northern Ireland Protocol, what's this all about? What really matters here is that Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, is being treated entirely differently to England, Wales and Scotland, because it's still under the authority, under the heel of the European Union.
Yeah.
Isn't that the point?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, you know, when you step away from all the technicality and, you know, a lot of this is couched in technical wording because it makes it very difficult for the electorate to understand what's happening. But at its fundamental level, Northern Ireland is subject to foreign laws made by a foreign legislature and enforced by a foreign court. That, by any commonsensical layman on the Clapham omnibus, is abuse of their human rights. We've got an American gentleman on our left, and he will testify that the reason we had the Boston Tea Party was because it was taxation without representation. Yes. And that's what the protocol is. It's taxation without representation.
We've got to ask you about Partygate. You raised it. Dom, do you care about Partygate? Should Boris Johnson be subjected to a 4-hour grilling?
Well, I'm always on for Boris Johnson being grilled for 4 hours, you know, why not? But, I mean, look, you know, at one level, Partygate has consumed too much political airtime. It's a relatively small issue. But at another level, you know, these were the laws which brought the country to its economic knees. Yeah. These were the laws that deprived us of fundamental civil liberties, enforced draconian rules that meant that our loved ones had to die on their own. So these were laws that should have been respected by those that made them.
Do you think...
No, I think he should be held to account, actually.
I would rather he was being grilled, actually, at the moment, Ben, a little bit on where he's making all his money at the moment.
So would I. He's made, I think, over £5 million within as many months since he left office. And a lot of the provenance of that money is not known. It comes from something called the Harvey Walker... A lot of it comes from the Harvey Walker Agency in New York. And that's been disclosed in the Register and Parliamentary Interests. But who are the Harvey Walker Agency? Who do they represent? Where does that money come from?
He's going to make a lot more, because, you know, Theresa May has made £2.5 million since she stood down as Prime Minister. Who would pay £2.5 million to go listen to Theresa May speak? Wouldn't you pay £2.5 million not to listen to her speak? Because she's so dull and boring.
No, I mean, look...
Boris is a terrific speaker, at least, and he's entertaining and amusing. She is not.
Well,
Trust me.
You know, she was a prime minister, and that in itself will mean that people will want to hear what she's got to say. But I think the speed with which Boris Johnson has cashed in on a national and international disaster, which he oversaw, I think there are huge questions to be asked to who's paying him.
Absolutely. And, you know, he's developed an ideological obsession with Ukraine, which is perhaps understandable and justifiable. But you just wonder, you know, how much of that is linked into the speeches that he's making and the money that's coming across. And there should be a bright light shone on all of that.
100%.
We must ask you about Reform UK. Bright new party, you're going to fight every seat, virtually every seat at the next general election, 630. Will that obliterate UKIP, or will it obliterate the Tories, or both?
Well, UKIP is sadly a shadow of its former self. Yeah, and but my aim, and I'm absolutely unequivocal about it, and Richard and Nigel are on board for this, is to obliterate the Tory party.
Right.
There will be no surrender. There will be no deals. There will be no standing down in seats. We are going to take the fight to the Conservative Party. They are not Conservative. They are not pro-Brexit, and they're certainly not unionists, as we've just discussed.
But if you kill the Tory party, you might let in Keir Starmer, who's the man who wanted a second referendum.
Andrew, you can't reward failure with incumbency. Down that road lies massive moral hazard. You inculcate bad behaviour, and we've had too much of that. We've had too much of, oh, I know we're awful, but the other lot are even worse. We've got to put paid to that. We're going to boot them out. I mean, they've got a year and a half to get their act together. Liz Truss very nearly came right. She very nearly espoused and even delivered some, remotely conservative policies. But this lot, they're not conservative. No one should bemoan the fact that the Conservative Party is going to be thumped in the next election. No Conservative should bemoan the fact that they're going to get thumped in the next election.
Ben
Stirring
Habib,
talk.
always lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you.
That alarm you heard going off was Greg Swinson telling us it's time to talk to him, I think. Morning, Greg. We're talking about, of course, the former President, Donald Trump, says that he's going to be arrested today. How likely is this, Greg?
It's unlikely he'll be arrested, but it's not unlikely he'll be indicted this week. I can't promise it's going to be today. I see some police preparations in New York. Maybe they're getting ready for some protests that he's sort of incited to a certain degree. But I think if he was arrested, it would be completely obscene and unnecessary. This whole case is obscene and unnecessary. I mean, there's no merit to it. So.
Really? I mean, he paid money, campaign money, to silence someone.
Well, he paid silent. He paid hush money.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. But they're trying to tie it into campaign finance irregularities. It's a bit of a stretch. Even if it were true, it would be a misdemeanor, not something that
was it his money he used to silence this woman who was going to kiss and tell?
He paid his lawyer, who paid her,
right?
And so they're trying to argue that that's campaign finance because it
actually came
before an election. It came from him. Yeah.
Right.
But I think it was, and isn't it about business misdemeanor, as you say? It's about a kind of business fraud. So his lawyer has paid Stormy Daniels the $130,000.
Yeah.
Because it couldn't be seen to come from Trump. And then Trump paid him back and said it was legal fees.
And, he was paying it for the same reason that all people pay that hush money. They don't want their wife to find out, or they don't want the public to find out. So
wasn't he with this woman before he was with the fabulous...
Melania.
Not even sure. It's like, it's so irrelevant.
Never know with Trump, do you?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just irrelevant because even, falsifying business records is a misdemeanor. So this is all a hoax. This is all, just a circus that they're trying to create. Now, why would they do that when the case has no merit? It would clearly lose on appeal if they found 12 anti-Trumpers in New York, which isn't difficult in Manhattan anyway. So they could win if they found enough, friendly jurors. But why would they do it then if the case has no merit and will fail on appeal? Because they want Trump to win the nomination. His numbers will go up. They're sort of playing into Trump's, victimhood, which he likes. Are some of his comments irresponsible? Sure, but they're going to look really bad here. Alvin Bragg is looking really bad. He's the district attorney that's indicting Trump here. The case has no merit because Cyrus Vance Jr., his predecessor, declined to take it on because it was stupid. The federal, the Justice Department, the feds declined to take it on. So, the only reason Alvin Bragg did is because he ran for that office as an anti-Trumper. He said, I'm going to get Trump. That was his campaign slogan. So, the whole thing is quite absurd. But again, why would they do it? Because they want to elevate Trump. Trump's numbers went up 30 points after the Mar-a-Lago raid. I think the Democrats know that. They don't want to run against Ron DeSantis for obvious reasons. So if they elevate Trump here, and they'll do this several more times during the election cycle, they want him to be the nominee.
Let's bring Ben Habib in that. It's pretty Machiavellian politics, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it
boosts the one you don't want.
Partygate looks slightly parochial and
doesn't it?
backwater,
doesn't it? They make us look like amateurs.
We have a bit of cake and you get sanctioned.
We don't have a Stormy Daniels here.
No.
Well, not that we know of with Boris, anyway.
Not that we're aware.
Not in recent times.
But I mean, are you a fan of Trump's?
Well, he had a very awkward manner of speaking, which I thought was unfortunate for him. But a lot of what he actually, if you listen to what he said, a lot of what he said and what he wanted to do and did was actually good. You know, America didn't start any new wars under his presidency. The economy did incredibly well. Everything was coming back under control. You suddenly get the Democrats back in power and, you know, you've got a war in Ukraine, you've got the economy going down the tubes, we've now got banks going bankrupt. So you just wonder if there's a connection between the political philosophy and, you know...
Can I just ask you, though, Greg?
Sure.
Do we know for a fact your theory about this is the Democrats trying to position Trump in popularity? I'm still processing that. That seems a stretch.
It might be a stretch. I'm not the only one who's suggesting it. The only other reason they could be doing this is to distract the media away from the fact that Bank of America released some bank records last week to the congressional investigators that has the Biden family cartel receiving payments from CEPC.
Yeah, when are they going to get into that?
Completely ignored by the mainstream media in the U.S. So, you know, that could be part of it as a bit of a distraction. But it is a bit of a conspiracy theory, Bev. But remember, the Democrats do this really well. They did it in the midterms in 22. They gave campaign money and had advertising supporting Trump candidates in the primaries. So they wanted to run against the most Trump-affiliated candidate. So they bankrolled candidates in the Republican primaries, and it worked.
And they were
it actually worked.
But I mean, they were the
It's dirty, but it's not
Biden
illegal.
could have finished Biden off, and he did very well in those midterms because of this Machiavellian politics.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so the Democrats, you know, they know how to play dirty. It's not illegal. It's a little sleazy, arguably.
Well,
but it could work. And same with, as I said, with Mar-a-Lago, you know, Trump went from +9 over DeSantis to +39 after the raid.
Cynical about politics.
Ben and Greg, thank you. That slightly sleazy start.
Yeah.
More reaction next to Baroness Casey's report that says that the Metropolitan Police Service is institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic. You're with GB News. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. Welcome to The Point with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Racist, sexist, homophobic, broken, the devastating verdict of that report into the Metropolitan Police. We're asking, is it any longer fit for purpose?
Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is on trial this morning in front of a governmental committee. He's accused of eating cake in lockdown. Do you care? It's reported that he's ready to make a comeback if he's cleared by this inquiry.
And is Donald Trump going to be arrested today or even indicted? Police in major US cities preparing for the inevitable unrest if that happens. We'll bring you the latest from America throughout the show.
And in a GB News exclusive, I got to sit down yesterday with one of the three men who were falsely accused of grooming by Eleanor Williams. Remember this case? We discussed it last week. His name is Mohammed Ramzan, and you do not want to miss what this did to his life.
Don't forget, we will know what you think on all these stories this morning. You email us at the usual place, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
First of all, let's get up to date with what's happening in the newsroom with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. A scathing report into Britain's largest police force has found it to be institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. Baroness Louise Casey led the review into the Metropolitan Police. She's warning victims have been let down and that officers who abuse their power have shattered public trust. The report found the Met's current ethics standards and disciplinary procedures have failed abysmally, and Baroness Casey is calling for a complete overhaul.
The moment that Sarah Everard was raped, abducted, raped and then murdered by a serving police officer, I find it extraordinary that in policing and in the Met Police, that wasn't their moment of like a plane falling out of the sky. I just think it is so dreadful. Change didn't come. So now this report has to carry that and has to take responsibility for getting the change needed.
Shadow Policing Minister Sarah Jones says Labour is calling for new mandatory national standards.
The facts are there for all to see. Whatever you call it, there is institutional racism and misogyny in the police force. We have let down women, we are letting down Londoners, and we are letting down the good police officers who are trying to do their job but are really stymied by lack of resources. So there is a role there for the Met, of course, but there is also a role for government. We need national standards that are mandatory on vetting and misconduct.
The sister of a head teacher who took her own life after an Ofsted inspection says her death was a direct result of the deeply harmful report and the pressure of the process. Ruth Perry was the head at Caversham Primary School in Reading. She killed herself in January while awaiting the review, which gave the school the lowest possible rating. The inspection report found the school to be good in every category apart from leadership and management, where it was judged to be inadequate. The Transport Secretary is calling on the RMT to give its members a vote on the latest pay offer from rail operators so next week's strikes can be called off. It's after members of the union who work for Network Rail accepted a similar pay rise of between 9.2 and 14.4%. Industrial action is planned by the RMT for next Thursday and Saturday, but Mark Harper is urging them to call it off.
Network Rail can now get on with delivering reform to how they deliver maintenance and how they run the infrastructure on the railways. That's halfway done. I think the next stage is that I want the RMT to put what is broadly the same fair and reasonable offer to their members that work for the train operating companies and call off next week's strike. So I think that would be fantastic news for the travelling public. If their members, if the RMT members get the chance to consider that pay offer as well for those that work on the train companies themselves.
New York police have erected barricades around a Manhattan courthouse as a precaution ahead of the possible indictment of former President Donald Trump. On Saturday, Trump urged his followers on social media to protest against what he said was his looming arrest. It's over allegations of hush money payments. Trump associates accused of paying more than £100,000 to adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential campaign. It would be the first ever criminal case against any US president. Damage caused by potholes has forced almost 2.7 million cars off the road in the past year. New research by the Asphalt Industry Alliance says one pothole is currently filled on our roads every 22 seconds. But local authority highway teams in England and Wales only received 2/3 of what they needed to prevent further deterioration last year. The Alliance says almost £14 billion is now needed to fix the backlog of carriageway repairs. Sir David Attenborough has planted a tree to honour the late Queen Elizabeth to officially open a new Platinum Jubilee woodland in Richmond Park. The broadcaster and environmentalist selected a young oak tree for the occasion, describing Elizabeth II as a great lover of trees and very fond of the royal parks. The Plant a Tree Jubilee project has seen more than 1 million new trees planted in honour of the late Queen. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev and Andrew.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. You've been getting in touch with your views this morning. We'll get to them in just a moment because a lot of them are about our main story this morning. Baroness Louise Casey's scathing review into Metropolitan Police.
We're going to go to our national reporter, Ellie Costello, who's at Scotland Yard this morning. Ellie, morning. I imagine they're pretty shell-shocked in there. They should be, because the report is devastating on absolutely every level.
Yes, racist, sexist, homophobic and broken. Those are the findings of this inquiry by Baroness Casey. She's been working on it for over a year. It was commissioned after the abduction, the rape and the murder of Sarah Everard, and it was while she was carrying out this report where another serving Metropolitan Police officer, David Carrick, was convicted of offences against 12 victims. This is the kind of culture that she's been working against, and it includes, this review, it includes instances where rape cases were dropped because there were freezers packed full of evidence that during the heatwave last year broke down. Therefore, that evidence was lost and those cases were subsequently dropped. Well, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has been responding to this review today. She says it's clear that there's been serious failings in the Metropolitan Police in terms of its culture and its leadership. She says that she's going to be holding the Commissioner to account, and she says a lot more needs to be done to root out unfit officers, and those unacceptable cases will unfortunately continue to come to light. She also says she's confident that there will be progress made under Sir Mark's leadership. Sir Mark Rowley has apologised to Londoners. He says that reading the report, he says it's ghastly and generates a series of emotions, including anger, frustration and embarrassment. But he doesn't agree agree with the language that Baroness Casey uses, which says that racism, sexism and homophobia are institutional in the Metropolitan Police Force. He doesn't want to use that word. He wants to focus on the good police officers within the Met instead. But there is criticism this morning, Bev and Andrew, that if Sir Mark Rowley is not willing to accept the true extent of the problems within the Metropolitan Police Force, then how is he going to enact change that Baroness Casey says is so desperately needed?
Later on, the Labour Party are doing a press conference about this. The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. We've seen Sarah Jones, the Shadow Police Minister, doing the broadcast rounds. Can we make sure that they are challenged about the role of the Mayor of London in all of this? He is the Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan, who is, of course, the Police and Crime Commissioner for London and ultimately responsible for the shambles that's the Met.
Now, I think
Ellie?
maybe we've lost Ellie.
Right.
We've got Peter Blexley in the studio with us, former detective at the Met Police, of course, friend of the show, friend of the channel. Let me bring one of our viewers to you, Peter. Barry has said it isn't the police's job to be nice to people. Their job is to arrest criminals who would like to do harm to them.
Well said, Barry. I couldn't agree more. But this report, which is unflinching, fearless and consequently brilliant, is the iceberg that the Metropolitan Police has crashed into this morning. And the Met Police is holed beneath the water. And I'm using these ship analogies because they're very apt. Because police officers who witness wrongdoing or hear about it and come forward to tell the truth about it are often seen as rocking the boat. Well, now, those officers, in their droves, if they are the good officers, and we want to hear from them, certainly the Anti-Corruption Command should be hearing from them in their droves, have got to come forward. They've got to be braver cops than I ever was, because I didn't report the wrongdoing. So consequently, they've got to be better human beings than I was, but they've got to do it. And if they get enough hands on deck, they might just stop this ship from sinking.
The trouble is, Peter, the great work done by the majority of your former colleagues in the police is now completely overlooked. People just think this force is not fit for purpose. Talk it could be broken up. What on earth is going on in the elite diplomatic and protection unit where Wayne Couzens was operating, where David Carrick was operating? These men, does it go to their head that they're protecting politicians and VIPs? Because that's where a lot of the abuse Casey has identified.
For many, many years, I've been expressing my concerns, both when I was in the police and outside of it, about police officers who exercise their biceps more than their brains. And that is, generally speaking, firearms officers for you. Right. You'll see them in the summer when they're photographed. They have their T-shirt at a particular height, just so you get a hint of bicep in the photograph. And clearly, with regards to the unit that Couzens and Carrick were on, which was a specialist firearms unit, that macho culture, and I suppose that expression is not really, doesn't go anywhere near as far as it should do, that toxic, revolting, vile culture has festered.
Here's the balance to get, though, isn't it? The police, and particularly those particular departments of the police, are going to attract a certain type of character. By necessity, they need to be the tough blokes, don't they, to do some of that job. How do you get it right, though, Peter? Is it about leadership to make sure that they aren't going too far?
They need to be very fit, but they need to be tough here. Not there, necessarily. They need to be fit. When I contemplated whether I should become a firearms officer, which I was, I thought long and hard, over weeks, about whether I wanted to take somebody's life. And when I decided that if the bad guys were going to have guns, then I thought I'd have one, I then stepped forward and did the training. But this culture that has been allowed to fester and develop is clearly something that needs to be dismantled as a matter of absolute urgency. And, of course, the wrongdoing that this report highlights time and time again throughout the service in so many other aspects of police work, which is chronically failing the public. Children investigations into crimes committed against children, failing. Sexual offences, failing. Rape investigations, failing. The public deserve better.
Do you think there is also there's a political problem here? Because you've got the Home Secretary on the one hand, you've got the Mayor of London on the one hand. We know when Sadiq Khan got rid of Cressida Dick, the former Metropolitan Police Commissioner, the Home Secretary at the time, Priti Patel, hardly knew anything about it. They're not operating together for the best interests of the people who are served by the Met.
Indeed, and it goes back further than that, because Boris Johnson got rid of Sir Ian Blair.
You're right.
And that was politics in policing.
Yep.
And Baroness Casey quite properly highlights in her report the fact that the Mayor's Office for Policing and Scotland Yard have not got the relationship they should have. So maybe there is now an opportunity for new faces, new personalities to come in there and mediate between the two and show them the polite, respectful, yet perhaps firm way that conversations could be had. Because when organisations in law enforcement fail because they are having infighting, there are only one band of people that benefit, and that is the villains.
Subsequent police Met commissioners have also rejected this word institutional problems, racism, homophobia, whatever. Are you OK with that word institutional? Because my feel about it is it lets individuals off the hook. And these are the behaviours of individuals, as I was saying earlier to our former police officer. And I think maybe there's a sense of, well, it's institutional. Is it disempowering? Well, we are just institutionally rotten.
Well, nearly 25 years ago, of course, Macpherson said that the Met was institutionally racist. And what has it done? Very little.
Well, it's gone backwards, Peter, I would argue. Because it was just going on about racism. Now it's institutionally homophobic and sexist.
Yeah, and there's a very, very strong evidence with bundles of evidence in Baroness Casey's report to support all of that. Of course, the Met is in a catastrophic state. Not all of it. Some bits of it still work fairly well in terms of homicide investigations, for example. But, of course, they're well-resourced and they've got experience on there. The front line of policing, the officers you are most likely to come into contact with when you dial 999, is quite frankly appalling. Where's the experience gone? They all fled for the hills when their pensions and paychecks got butchered.
And people watching and listening to this be thinking, no wonder my house, when I was burgled, there was no investigation, my car was nicked. These are really important matters to people, and you don't get to see or hear from a police officer because the whole force is in chaos.
You certainly don't. But next week, I've had a letter through my door saying that my local neighbourhood team are having a public meeting.
Oh.
I shall be getting there very early and ensuring that my seat is in the front row.
I'd like to be a fly on the wall like that.
I think I'm just trying to also think, if my house had been broken into this week, would I care that the police were racist, sexist, homophobic? Of course, I don't want anybody in my life to behave in that manner, to discriminate against people. But I'm much less bothered about that than whether they get my stuff back.
You should be very bothered about whether they're sexist, particularly if you're at home when that officer knocks on the door and comes to investigate the crime. You should be very, very concerned about that.
Just explain that to us a bit, because I don't think I'll be alone in feeling that feels like it's not as important as catching the baddies.
Because there are police officers who are being removed not only from the Met but from other police services because they see the opportunity to engage with a victim of crime to turn it into a date or a relationship and not to investigate that crime properly. And that is shameful. And many officers have been sent packing, some to prison, in very recent days and weeks because of exactly that.
And it could be, if it's a black person homes they're visiting, they're not going to take it as seriously because they're racist, or if you're gay, a couple of old puffs, who cares about that?
Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
Well,
It's 2023.
Exactly.
What on earth is going on? A part of what's going on is that certain senior police officers, as they climb that greasy pole of ambition, they think that policing is about self-service and not public service. And I've been saying this for years.
I just don't understand why there's never been more emphasis in the workplace for police officers to get this stuff right, and yet it's never been so bad. Why?
Well, one word that's sadly missing from a lot of policing and is regarded as a bit of a dirty word and also begins with D is discipline. It is a disciplined organisation, and it should be. But those ambitious cops who want to get to the top are fearful of imposing discipline in case somebody screams, "I'm being bullied." There is nothing wrong with polite and firm discipline. In fact, it is essential in an organisation such as the police.
OK, Peter.
Bexley, thank you so much for coming. And by the way, we'd like to know what happens at that meeting with your local police. Now, coming up, an Eritrean migrant who settled in Rwanda more than 17 years ago has told GB News he liked moving to the Central African nation.
The migrant, who now owns a chain of supermarkets in Kigali with his brother, had at one time been planning to come to the UK. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is in Kigali and he sent us this report.
To its critics, Rwanda has a deeply flawed political leadership with a lamentable record on human rights. To others, including the British government, this is an intrinsically safe and prosperous country. The truth, as always, is more complex and not well served by simple stereotypes. This coffee shop on the outskirts of the capital, Kigali, was opened 4 years ago by a husband and wife from Yemen who fled the fighting there as refugees and eventually settled in Rwanda. They've gone on to create a thriving business.
When we just landed in Rwanda, in the first few days, we decided we will not leave this country. We've been in Malaysia. Malaysia was not this clean or organized or safe.
When we just arrived here, people, they are so welcoming. They love expat, We saw that this different.
This is one of Africa's most dynamic economies. All the more remarkable given the genocide here less than 3 decades ago, which left 800,000 dead and millions displaced. Pierre Nyumbia's family fled Rwanda's civil war and eventually ended up in Canada. She's returned to be part of the regeneration, setting up a business that champions local arts and design. The fact so many here were displaced by the genocide has, she says, instilled a genuine compassion in many Rwandans for the plight of refugees.
It's definitely welcome because I think for us it's skill sets that are needed. And they're things that will help elevate a lot of the work that we're doing. I know for us as a fashion brand, we're always looking to collaborate with people from all over the world.
Rwanda's critics say its leaders care little for the plight of those displaced in neighbouring Congo, where it's accused of supporting rebel fighters there. Still, Rwanda is currently host to 140,000 refugees. The Eritrean owner of this Kigali supermarket chain arrived here 25 years ago after fleeing the fighting there. He was later joined by his brother, who decided to settle here rather than travel to study in the UK. Do you think people coming here, refugees sent here from the UK, do you think that they have a chance of making a good life for themselves, or will it be very difficult?
I don't think they will have any problem really, because this is a very, very peaceful country, a very clean, things are in order. Had the people been bad people, I wouldn't have lived here for such a long years, and then we wouldn't have been able to grow to this level where we are today.
It would be wrong to suggest Rwanda offers the same level of opportunities and personal freedoms as the UK. But from what I've seen, it's clear there is still plenty of potential for those who end up here to make a good life for themselves and certainly enjoy greater freedoms than the circumstances they say they're fleeing allow. This is a fast developing country. It's not all the way there yet and certainly needs to do more to meet Western standards and human rights. But the country's supporters say it's rapidly moving in the right direction. Mark White, GB News in the Rwandan capital, Kigali.
So up next, the Bank of England's next interest rate decision is on a knife edge after Credit Suisse became the biggest lender to be hit by the turmoil hitting global banks.
This is To The Point on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 10:25. You're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, the Bank of England's next interest rate seems to be poised on a knife edge after Credit Suisse was the latest bank to succumb to the banking turmoil.
Sir Charlie Bean is a professor of economics at the London School of Economics. Sir Charlie, morning to you. When we read about Credit Suisse, we think, oh, well, that's in Switzerland. But, of course, apart from the fact the bank employs a lot of people in London Square Mile, the turmoil on the markets could affect whether the Bank of England puts interest rates up this week or not.
Good morning. It's certainly thrown another factor into the mix. As you say, the turmoil around Credit Suisse is primarily in Switzerland, but it has consequences elsewhere, and just adds to the general air of uncertainty over the state of the banking system. So we've obviously seen the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in the States, and a couple of other smaller American banks, now Credit Suisse. And it's natural in those circumstances that financial institutions start becoming a little bit more cautious in their lending decisions, in the way they manage their balance sheets, and so forth. And the Monetary Policy Committee, who anyway would have been faced with a difficult balancing act for the coming decision, have another factor to throw into the mix, which would push them a little bit more towards raising rates more slowly or not at all than they would otherwise have done.
Charlie, there'll be people watching this who might have worked very hard all their lives, put some savings to one side, got a pension pot maybe ready to go. Should those people be worried right now about what's going to happen to their investments?
No, I don't think people should be worried about the safety of their savings. Most people holding money in banks, in bank accounts, will have sums which are less than the £85,000 ceiling on deposit insurance. So they'd be fully protected, providing they've got their savings in a regular bank. If you've got investments in other instruments in the stock market or investment funds or something like that, you will have seen losses in recent times because the price of those assets has fallen. Going forward, of course, there's uncertainty. The recent uncertainty around the financial markets, around banks, has spread to affect the prices of other companies. But you know, who knows what will happen to that going forward? The stock market is something that's very difficult to predict. But the sensible thing, frankly, is not to try and think you can guess the market. It's probably better to leave your funds where they are. Stock markets go up, stock markets go down. But as I say, for people who've got their savings in bank accounts, they shouldn't be worried about the viability of UK banks.
In the budget report last week, Sir Charlie, you will have read it probably from cover to cover in more detail than I did. There was a prediction that house prices could fall by 10% in the next 12 months. Is this uncertainty with the banking sector and interest rates going to impact the housing market even more and perhaps make the prices even more volatile?
Well, I should emphasise, when it comes to predicting the housing market, it's pretty difficult. And as much as anything, the OBR's forecast is an assumption rather than a prediction, and they recognise the uncertainty around that assumption. That said, the turmoil in financial markets is likely to have some side effect, simply because of the point I made earlier, that banks are likely to become a bit more cautious about their lending decisions as a result of what's been happening. Sure. And that will have a consequence for the availability of mortgage finance.
And whether people ultimately...
an extra dampening factor.
That's right. And whether people can afford interest rates that high on a mortgage, which we've not been used to in recent times. Sir Charlie Bean, a Professor of Economics at London School of Economics, thank you. You might say he's the bean counter.
Indeed, very good. Bum, 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 bum.
I resisted saying that to him. He was quite serious. Right, still to come this morning. Partygate. Do you care? Boris only ate some cake? That's all after your morning's news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 10:31. Here are the headlines. A scathing report into Britain's largest police force has found it to be institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. Baroness Louise Casey led the review into the Metropolitan Police. She's warning victims have been let down and that officers who abuse their power have shattered public trust in the force. The report found the Met's current ethics standards and disciplinary procedures have failed abysmally. And Baroness Casey is calling for a complete overhaul of the force.
The moment that Sarah Everard was raped, abducted, raped and then murdered by a serving police officer, I find it extraordinary that in policing and in the Met Police, that wasn't their moment of like a plane falling out of the sky. I just think it is so dreadful. Change didn't come. So now this report has to carry that and has to take responsibility for getting the change needed.
The sister of a head teacher who took her own life after an Ofsted inspection says her death was a direct result of the deeply harmful report and the pressure of the process. Ruth Perry was the head at Caversham Primary School in Reading. She killed herself in January while awaiting the review, which gave the school the lowest possible rating. The inspection report found the school to be good in every category apart from leadership and management, where it was judged to be inadequate. The Transport Secretary is calling on the RMT union to give its members a vote on the latest pay offer from rail operators so next week's strikes can be called off. It's after members of the union who work for Network Rail accepted a similar pay rise of between 9.2% and 14.4%. Industrial action is planned by the RMT for next Thursday and Saturday. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's over to Bev and Andrew.
So we know it's in the dictionary now, partygate, but do you really care? Boris, after all, only ate a little bit of cake. I'm not even sure he ate the cake.
No, I don't think he did, but isn't that ridiculous? That's what we're worried about, whether he ate the cake rather than the harms of all the lockdown and whether he should have been observing those rules in the first place. This is To The Point on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10:36. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So Boris Johnson is to face showdown over partygate that could be the end of his political career.
His defence team, however, has accused the inquiry of suppressing evidence they say could actually mean he'll have to step down as an MP.
He faces allegations that he misled Parliament when he denied coronavirus lockdown rules were broken when parties were held in Number 10.
Well, joining us in Westminster now is our very own political reporter, Olivia Utley. Olivia, the inquiry has to, when he gives evidence tomorrow, has to prove that he knowingly misled Parliament, and there's quite a lot of fuss about that in Team Boris, about the fact that the committee has changed the rules in a way.
Yes, so Boris Johnson's defence, which he gave to the committee yesterday, the 60-page dossier which the committee so far is still sitting on, his defence rests on 3 different arguments. The first is that the committee has, as you suggest there, has lowered the bar for what counts as misleading Parliament in a way that would lead to a resigning offence. So we know that knowingly misleading Parliament, intentionally misleading Parliament, i.e. lying, is a resigning offence. But the committee has changed the words in what they're looking for Boris, and they are now saying knowingly or recklessly misled Parliament. Well, recklessly is a word that comes with no precedent. So if the committee finds finds that they can't prove that he knowingly misled, but they can say that he recklessly misled, well, what exactly does that mean? The other defence that Boris Johnson is resting on is that the committee itself is biased. So Harriet Harman, who is chairing the committee, the Labour mother of the House, tweeted last year saying that Boris Johnson knowingly lied. Well, Boris Johnson's defence team say that that proves that she'd already prejudged the outcome of this inquiry before it even went into committee stage. And the final defence that Boris Johnson's team is resting on is that when Boris said to the House that he wasn't aware of any parties, he was acting on the advice of his officials. So he didn't knowingly mislead because he was only doing what his officials had told him to do. Now, Whitehall sources are now saying that he was told that he was given correct advice by his officials, but he then went off script in Parliament. So it's not clear whether that particular piece of his defence is going to hold. But it'll be really interesting to find out more when this committee finally decides that it is time to release this 60-page dossier, hopefully later today.
Is there an appetite within the Conservative Party for Boris Johnson to be cleared and come back in some sort of capacity? Or is that Rishi Sunak's worst nightmare?
Well, it's a really interesting question. Actually, there's a Conservative Home, the renowned website which polls Conservative members. Conservative Home poll out today suggesting that Conservatives on the whole would like to see Boris Johnson's name cleared and they would like to see him remaining an MP, but they don't particularly want him coming back to a high-level position. And of course, Rishi Sunak is very worried about that too. Now, Rishi Sunak has granted MPs a free vote on whether to suspend Boris, essentially, or put it to the Uxbridge constituency on whether to suspend Boris if he is found guilty. Well, that in itself comes with all sorts of difficulties. There's likely to be a cabinet split. Suella Braverman has already indicated that she would support Boris, but there are plenty of ministers in Rishi Sunak's government who wouldn't. So the Boris problem isn't really going away for Rishi Sunak, but he may take some comfort from the fact that at least Conservative members don't seem to want him back as Prime Minister imminently, or at least according to this Conservative Home poll out today.
That's Olivia Rutley, our political correspondent at Westminster. He just dominates the news, doesn't he? When he's around, when he opens his mouth, he dominates. And here to talk about Boris Johnson, lots of other things, is Dawn Neeson, former editor of the Daily Star.
About Boris.
And John McTernan, who, of course, was a long-standing advisor to Tony Blair. Partygate?
It's fantastic. It's the gift that keeps on giving to the Labour Party because it actually shows us in slow motion what we always knew about Boris. No one doubted that the man that they made the leader of the Tory party and the man that the public, the voters, made Prime Minister, no one doubted that he was a man who would also break rules. He's broken rules all through his professional career. He's broken rules. He broke the rules to get to the top of the Tory party. So why be surprised he does it in his own house, Downing Street? And I just think his defence is of a piece with his whole style of management leadership. It was somebody else. A big boy did it and they ran away.
But don't you think, John, that what we should be talking about more than whether Boris Johnson broke the rules is whether the rules should have been there in the first place, and when Labour were just saying more lockdowns, more restrictions, you can't see your family, more school closures.
I know, the thing is, these were Boris Johnson's own rules. It's like the defence can't be, do you know what? I may have broken the rules, but actually looking back, I think there were too many rules. His rules, he put them on us. He made us unable to see our own
Labour
relatives.
wanted more.
No, we just want it. You don't want the person who's in charge of drawing up the rules and speaking to us every day on the television, telling us to stick to the rules. So then it turns out he's running like a frat house. Downing Street was not a frat house in my days.
Dawn, do you think the voters, the public, are as exercised about this as they were perhaps at the time when people couldn't get to funerals, they couldn't visit people in nursing homes and hold mum's hand?
I think Bev's right to a certain extent. I think there's still an awful lot of anger out there, and rightly so. The rules were nonsensical, and I suspect many of us thought that maybe they were being broken by the people that were setting them, and now that has proven to be the case. The problem we've got with the Boris Johnson situation at the moment is the fact, as John quite clearly pointed out, he is a liar, he's a proven liar. He's lost jobs because he lied, and not to mention wives.
It would take too long if you mention wives.
Yeah, how long
got all day.
I'm not going to mention children, otherwise we would be here all day. But the problem is, right, the fact that he lies, you've got to prove that he knew he was lying in this case, and that's a tricky thing. Proving someone has lied, but proving they knowingly lied is a different thing.
Well, he didn't. If you mislead the House, you have the chance to go back and correct the record. And the thing is...
But he did.
He did. Well...
He did.
Did
no,
he
he
do
did.
it? Did he do
John,
it?
He did, and he apologised.
Did he do it as quickly as he could have?
But he did. It's on the record, and he apologised.
Yeah, you're not meant to wait until the moment of your convenience. You're meant to do it as soon as you actually realise. And it goes back to the heart of this thing, which is that when people are bringing, suitcases full of wine, when there's waste paper baskets full of vomit, when there's wine splashed on the walls,
kids broken swings,
and the Privileges Committee actually went in and walked around Number 10 to work out where the PM was, what he had to walk past, where events were. So, like, it's kind of, I think they've done a reasonably, to put it in a Starmer-esque way, forensic job on this.
Yeah. What about your mate, Harriet Harman? How can she truly, John, be objective as chairwoman of this committee? I know she's a barrister.
Former law officer.
But she's made her position clear, and you know Harriet Harman wakes up every day thinking, how can I cause maximum difficulty for the Tory party?
She is one of the most distinguished figures in the House of Commons, 40 years in the House of Commons.
Have you ever heard her be nice about the Tories?
And she's chairing a committee with a majority of Tory MPs on it. It will be the decision of the committee, not the decision of the chair. And that's what's... And the thing that Harriet has done is made sure that they have independent legal advice in a situation where, extraordinarily, an incredibly expensive barrister is being employed by the taxpayer to defend Boris Johnson. No, Boris Johnson is an MP. He's being asked by his MP peers, the Privileges Committee, whether he as an MP broke the rules as an MP. He wasn't being asked whether he broke the rules as Prime Minister, as an MP.
John,
the taxpayer shouldn't pay for that. Boris Johnson should be paying.
Of course not.
Part of his £800,000 loan should be paying. How can we be paying for his lawyers?
Tony Blair had every single penny of his legal costs paid during the Iraq War inquiries, of which we were talking to you about. Of course he did. This is about when he was Prime Minister in Number 10. Did he mislead the House? The question is whether he misled the House when he was Prime Minister.
No, as an MP.
No, it's whether he misled the Commons as Prime Minister.
No, it's whether
from that dispatch box.
Whether he misled the Prime Minister as an MP.
It's not right.
I was going to make that point, actually, so well done, I'll just shut up. I was just going to say, we were joking outside, John, about you going to advise Boris. What advice would you give him now?
I just say the first thing is always say sorry as quickly and admit as much as possible as soon as possible, because being sorry doesn't always get you out of stuff. But having an apology dragged out of you is always very damaging, and that's what's been proven.
20 years of Iraq War yesterday, John. Do you feel like we've had that apology from Tony Blair?
What to apologise for liberating Iraq?
Is that how you see it with the passage of time?
Defending the United Nations weapons inspectorate regime. There's nothing to apologise for.
Well, there is. There's the hundreds of thousands of people who died.
Killed by terrorists.
The fact that Saddam Hussein was executed and a democracy did not replace it. The Islamic State stepped in. The Middle East has been in a state of absolute chaos ever since. He's got a huge apology.
Why do you?
You're the first person I know to defend
everything. This is the extraordinary situation of modern British politics. Tony Blair stood down as Prime Minister in 2007, and yet everything apparently is his fault, is his responsibility. Like, the Iraq War was a just war. The Iraq War, we know, 20 years on, was not an illegal war, it was a legal war. And the Iraq War actually was in defence of the United Nations weapons inspectors. If weapons inspectors can't get in to inspect,
but there was never any evidence. No. There's never any evidence of weapons of mass destruction.
Well, there's plenty.
And he stood up in the House of Commons and Tony Blair lied, and he said, we have evidence of weapons of mass destruction. And he said to Bush, I will be with you no matter what, regardless of the human collateral damage, regardless of the vacuum that is left in that space.
Don't you remember the dodgy dossier?
I don't think we've ever had a proper explanation.
The dodgy dossier? They sexed up?
Every single country in the West had the same intelligence. Same intelligence.
Not how many of them joined the military action?
Yeah, I know. So how
many joined the military action? Did Germany?
The Germans and the French decided not to be involved. There's a big surprise, the Germans and the French not being involved. They did come in immediately afterwards to scoop up the reconstruction contract.
They didn't bomb the civilians.
What do you think?
Dawn,
Yes.
did you reflect on the Iraq War yesterday, 20 years, whether we've learned anything from that time?
Have we learned anything? No, I don't think we have, sadly. As we've already discussed, many thousands of people died, and, you know, I do think Tony Blair still has questions to answer on that one, and all this recollections may vary. And if we talk about Boris Johnson being very bullish and not admitting that he ever does anything wrong, I think Tony Blair is cut from the same cloth. And Tony Blair has gone on to make millions of pounds from it as well, which I rankles a bit.
He's advised some pretty dodgy countries too.
Exactly.
And continues to be at the centre of lots of global political decisions which upset a lot of people.
What decisions?
Digital ID.
That's not a decision. He's put forward an opinion. Him and William Hague have got the same opinion.
Biometric digital ID, which no doubt he will make a lot of money out of.
How?
The Tony Blair Foundation has tentacles in all of these huge.
It doesn't run a software company. It doesn't run a digital ID company. It doesn't run it's not.
So what's in it for him then? Why is he the spokesperson for that?
Well, because he and William Hague both agree that we actually should have a modernised ID system for this country. Every other country in Europe has got one. So why
because nobody has voted for it. It's not democratic. That has not been on any on any political agenda. And suddenly Tony Blair's parachuted in, telling us we're all going to be tied to our tech, biometric digital ID. A lot of people don't like it, John.
Tony Blair and William Hague together wrote that report.
That towering political figure, William Hague, who led the Tories... led the Tories to their worst election defeat against Tony Blair in 2001, the worst election defeat in 170 years. That towering political figure.
He's a significant figure.
Shall we talk about Met Police? Right, we've had this Casey review. It looks terrible for the Met Police, Dawn. A lot of our viewers getting in touch saying it isn't the police's job to be nice to people and to always choose the perfect word and not offend anyone. They need to be catching criminals. But clearly they're not getting it right.
No, they are. They're not. And I must admit, I read as much of the report as I had time to read this morning and talking to Peter Blakesley, who you had on earlier on. And it's absolute. As a woman in London, I find it utterly, utterly chilling. And Peter was saying that his wife had a long career in the Met. Starting in the 1980s, she worked in child protection. And she read this report and she read the testimonies. And she actually said, Bev, she said, this is worse than in the 1980s and the early 1990s. And that I find particularly, utterly appalling. I mean, and 3 decades nearly after the Macpherson report, we you know, the institutional racism then seems to have spread now into institutional misogyny and homophobia, and I just find some of the testimonies from female police officers about how they've been treated, and obviously the whole Sarah Everard thing. You know what, I still actually have nightmares about Sarah Everard's last few hours on this earth. How utterly horrific and terrified that poor woman.
Having put her trust in a police officer.
Absolutely, and you know, the question I'm being asked now all the time is, as a woman, do I trust the police? And you have to.
Yeah.
What alternatives do we have? You have to trust the police. And that's all Sarah did that night. But women, if you are watching, this report is horrific, but you must come forward if you are sexually assaulted or attacked. Please, you have to put your trust in the police and you have to fight your corner and you have to go and report these crimes, because otherwise we are never going to sort this out.
Do you think, John, it was always that elements of the police will have been homophobic, they will have been chauvinistic, they will have been racist, but now we're just looking for it in a way that we haven't before?
No, this is fundamental, systemic, it's structural. That's what Macpherson found. Some good work was done after Macpherson, not enough. I mean, the thing is, one of the issues around the Met Police is their use of violence. Now, Cresta Dick should never, ever have become the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police after she was the lead officer in the murder of Jean-Charles de Menezes. She should have been sacked at that point, not promoted. And the unwillingness of politicians to actually do the role of managing the police force, bowing to what they want to do.
They used an expression in the report, John, eye-watering force on suspects.
Yeah.
Eye-watering force.
Well,
and we've heard of the people who haven't made it.
We saw the pictures of Clapham, what was done to women who were demonstrating about the murder of a woman by a police officer. But actually, in one sense, what we're all learning today and hearing about is what the black community in London has experienced for decades.
Yeah.
It's what all the minorities and oppressed communities have experienced for decades, and the homophobia. And it was unacceptable in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and it's definitely unacceptable now. And
Baroness Casey says in that report, after Sarah Everard, she said it should have been the equivalent of a plane falling out of the sky. Really graphic, dramatic imagery.
Yes.
And nothing happened.
No, I know.
I think the language Baroness Casey has used is particularly good because it does.
Yeah.
You know, normally these reports are incredibly dry,
She speaks like
a bit
that.
woolly, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Face to face. That's how she talks.
Brilliant, and I think that really does hammer it home. So everyone can read this report, and obviously the report is literally on every front page this morning.
Really is.
And I think the language is written in is really hitting home to everybody. And the one quote I keep coming back to is this awful: the rape detection rate is so low in London, you may as well say it's illegal. And that I just
Very
find
powerful, isn't it?
horrific.
Sadiq Khan playing a bit of politics with this morning and capitalising upon it, do you think, John?
Well, my own view is that...
Go on, put the boot in on Labour for a change,
No,
John.
my own view is that Sadiq was too slow to act on Cressida Dick. Too slow to act over Sarah Everard.
Yeah.
There were many times before that. I think you can say he was hampered by the split responsibility with the Home Secretary. Either the mayor's in charge or the mayor's not in charge. Either the Home Secretary's in charge.
I agree. We've talked about that earlier.
And,
it can't be both.
It can't be both. And it's like the one thing I was surprised about and disappointed by in the appointment after Cressida Dick was there was an opportunity to go around the world, search for the best police chief in the world, and go, you have got carte blanche to reform this place. There is a Casey inquiry, but when you get in here, if you're a decent cop, you will know what's wrong from top to bottom. Try and sort it now.
Sure. John McTernan, Dawn Neeson, thank you so much.
You're going to be back with us.
OK, so in the next few moments, it's going to bring you a GB News exclusive. Before the show, I spoke to one of the three men who were falsely accused of grooming by Eleanor Williams. His name is Mohammed Ramzan. More to come on that in the next hour. Don't miss it.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. For most, a brighter day today compared to yesterday with some sunshine, but there are a few heavy showers around, still pretty mild as well. Weather systems are gathering out in the Atlantic. They're all going to bring spells of rain across the UK. One is clearing away, leaving us, as I say, with a brighter day, but still plenty of showers around over the Midlands and eastern England. Some pretty lively downpours this afternoon. A heavy shower is likely in a few places. Parts of Scotland seeing a scattering of showers. Much of Wales and southwest England will stay dry. Not too many showers here, and we see more persistent rain moving into Northern Ireland by the end of the afternoon. Pretty mild temperatures, mostly getting into the teens when the sun is shining. We could get up to 16 Celsius, but the breeze will be picking up as we go through the day, and it's going to get windy overnight. And not just windy, wet. That rain for Northern Ireland this afternoon spreads to most areas before midnight. Some quite heavy bursts of rain in the west, and the winds will get very gusty, particularly in western Scotland, come first thing on Wednesday morning. It'll be another pretty mild night with some towns and cities in the south staying in double figures. A fairly damp start then across East Anglia and the southeast to Wednesday morning. A very windy start in western Scotland, blustery conditions here, and those gusty winds will spread across northern Scotland with plenty of heavy showers through the day. We'll see some showers developing across parts of Wales and western England, and they'll spread further east come the afternoon. But again, many places actually seeing decent spells of sunshine, but it will be a windy day. Still pretty mild, double figures, maybe 15, 16 across the southeast, but feeling colder with the winds. The winds will ease a touch through Wednesday evening, but further bands of heavy showers coming in from the west, and that sets us up really for the rest of the working week with further spells of showery rain zipping across the country on blustery winds, staying pretty mild as well, but there are some signs of colder conditions spreading south this weekend.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
So this morning, racist, sexist, homophobic and broken. That's the verdict of a damning new report into the country's largest police force. Is the Met still fit for purpose?
And former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he's going to be on trial over partygate. He was accused of eating cake. I don't think he actually ate the cake. We're asking, do you care? And do you want him to make a comeback if he gets cleared?
And former President of America, Donald Trump, might be arrested today. Police in major US cities are preparing for potential unrest in the event that that happens. We'll bring you the latest on what's happening in America throughout the show.
And this is a GB News exclusive. I'll let Bev talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. I spoke yesterday to one of the 3 men who were falsely accused of grooming by Eleanor Williams. His name is Mohammed Ramzan. He told me some astonishing things. You do not want to miss it.
Don't forget, let us know your thoughts on all our talking points there. You know what to do. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
First of all, though, here is your latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thanks very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 11. A scathing report into Britain's largest police force has found it to be institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. Baroness Louise Casey, who led the review into the Metropolitan Police, is warning victims have been let down and that officers who abuse their power have shattered public trust. Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley has said he's sorry and that this must be a catalyst for change. The report also found the Met's current ethics standards and disciplinary procedures have failed abysmally, and Baroness Casey is calling for a complete overhaul.
The moment that Sarah Everard was raped, abducted, raped and then murdered by a serving police officer, I find it extraordinary that in policing and in the Met Police, that wasn't their moment of like a plane falling out of the sky. I just think it is so dreadful. Change didn't come. So now this report has to carry that and has to take responsibility for getting the change needed.
Shadow Policing Minister Sarah Jones says Labour is calling for new mandatory national standards.
The facts are there for all to see. Whatever you call it, there is institutional racism and misogyny in the police force. We have let down women, we are letting down Londoners, and we are letting down the good police officers who are trying to do their job but are really stymied by lack of resources. So there is a role there for the Met, of course, but there is also a role for government. We need national standards that are mandatory on vetting and misconduct.
Former Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury told us she's appalled by the findings. She admits her career was tarnished after becoming a whistleblower and says officers should be able to speak out without fear of punishment.
When you're a whistleblower and you try to speak out, you very, very quickly find yourself isolated, you find yourself being victimised, you find yourself being intimidated by officers, you find your ranks being closed around you. There's an inability by leaders within the organisation, managers, to fail to actually deal with these issues because they're too scared of their own career progression.
To other news now, the sister of a head teacher who took her own life after an Ofsted inspection says her death was a direct result of the deeply harmful report and the pressure of the process. Ruth Perry was the head at Caversham Primary School in Reading. She killed herself in January while awaiting the review which gave the school the lowest possible rating. The inspection report found the school to be good in every category apart from leadership and management, where it was judged to be inadequate. The Transport Secretary is calling on the RMT to give its members a vote on the latest pay offer from rail operators, so next week's strikes can be called off. It's after members of the union who work for Network Rail accepted a similar pay rise of between 9.2% and 14.4%. Industrial action is planned by the RMT for next Thursday and Saturday, but Mark Harper is urging them to call it off.
Network Rail can now get on with delivering reform to how they deliver maintenance and how they run the infrastructure on the railways. That's halfway done. I think the next stage is that I want the RMT to put what is broadly the same fair and reasonable offer to their members that work for the train operating companies and call off next week's strike. So I think that would be fantastic news for the travelling public if their members, if the RMT members get the chance to consider that pay offer as well for those that work on the train companies themselves.
The Kremlin says Presidents Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have discussed China's peace plan for Ukraine during their first day of talks in Moscow. It's understood the 12-point paper calls for a de-escalation of the war and an eventual ceasefire. President Putin said he'd carefully studied China's ideas and viewed them with respect. The pair will meet for a second day of talks later. President Xi has invited Putin to visit China and called for regular meetings. Damage caused by potholes has forced almost 2.7 million cars off the road in the past year. New research by the Asphalt Industry Alliance says one pothole is currently filled on our roads every 22 seconds, but local authority highways teams in England and Wales only received 2/3 of what they needed to prevent further deterioration last year. The Alliance says almost £14 billion is now needed to fix the backlog of carriageway repairs. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Good morning, it's 11:06. Thank you for joining us on GB News. A damning new report out today into Britain's largest police force has found it to be institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic.
The report's by Baroness Louise Casey. It's an independent review into the Met Police and she's found it, quote, rotten. She's also called for a complete overhaul because she says trust in the police has collapsed.
Meanwhile, Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley, says progress is being made to reform the Met.
Accepting her language in terms of the bullets of the diagnosis of what we've got wrong. I'm just simply not wrapping it up in the same label. We are going to be anti-racist, anti-misogynist, anti-homophobic. I've stepped up massively our capability in our professional standards department. Our men and women in the organisation are reporting more incidents. We are sacking officers at a faster rate because of their help. So we are making the progress that people would expect us to do. It's going to take us some time, but we are slowly reducing the risk that we have people in the organisation who don't have the integrity the public would expect.
That was Sir Mark Rowley. He's the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. Sorry if you don't share my view, but I think he's deeply, deeply underwhelming. Joining us to talk more about this is the crime, justice and policing commentator, Danny Shaw. Danny, morning. This report is shocking in every level. You're a veteran of these. What, to you, is probably the worst part of it?
I think the worst part of it, Andrew, is the culture of the Met. Many of us who've covered policing over a quarter of a century, as I have, know that it's an organisation that's very proud of itself. It likes to think that it knows how to do things best. It's a kind of we know best attitude. You know, outsiders, their views aren't really welcome or appreciated. And this report really nails that culture in a way that no other report into the Met has ever done. It really gets underneath the body of the Met. It shows this defensiveness culture, this denial, this arrogant culture. And then alongside all that, you have these terrible examples of prejudice, bias, discrimination, which are really sickening. And then, as well as that, you've got this extensive analysis of data, analysis that the Met has never done itself, but this review team has managed to do in 12 months, which show that a lot of the processes and procedures have discrimination sort of embedded within them. So overall, the whole culture of the place is toxic, despite the fact that I know that there are thousands of amazingly talented, dedicated, skilled officers and investigators who do carry out amazing inquiries, but they're being let down by a minority of officers and the structure and the culture of the place.
Danny, let me read one of our viewers' messages to you. Mark has got in touch from Scotland and he says, the Met have been on the back foot ever since they abandoned communities to the criminals with the closure of stations, removal of beat officers and softening of sentences under pressure from so-called progressives who always take the side of the villains. Discipline and smartness have gone. Is it any wonder that lowlifes apply now to be cops? There's a lot in there, but just unpack that a bit for me. I think particularly the visuals of having police officers on our streets, people miss that.
Yeah, look, I don't think you can blame the police for sentencing, OK? But in terms of the closure of police stations, yes, I think well over 100 police stations in London have been closed. And what the report does really well, it identifies the fact that resources and power have gone to the centre of New Scotland Yard and away from local borough units. In London, there are 12 basic borough command units, BCUs. And some of these areas, for example, cover southwest London or northwest London. They are bigger than police forces outside the capital. And yet the person in charge holds the rank of commander, which is just above chief superintendent. And yet they're in command of thousands of officers and staff, hugely complex issues. But there's too much power in the centre. And I think that's the reason why people who are calling in, listening in, saying, well, we don't see cops on the street, the police stations have closed, the investigations are shoddy. It's because a lot of the resource and the power has gone to the centre and the specialist units. And the report really brings that out. And that's got to change. That is the one structural change that I think needs to happen now. Can't wait another 2 or 5 years.
Is there also, Danny, a contradiction, inherent contradiction, in fact, this police force is in the thick of the battle against anti-terror, and yet it's also the police force that I want to knock on my door when my house is burgled or my car is pinched. Can the two, are they incompatible? Should they now be separated out?
I think there's an argument for that. I think that the problem with that is that the counter-terrorism policing command, by general consent, is pretty effective. It's well-resourced, got some top people working there. If you start to dismantle it or change the structure, the danger is that you weaken that. I think
Danny,
there is an argument to say...
Danny, isn't the point, though, that because it is so effective, it's getting the lion's share of the resources, and perhaps some of those resources are not filtering down to community policing, to local police stations, to bobbies on the beat?
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a question about resourcing. But I'm not sure that changing the structure of the counter-terrorism unit and hiving it off from the Met is the answer. But I think there is a question about resources. But don't forget that terrorism starts at community level, at neighbourhood level, with people having trust in the police to give them tips, to give them intelligence, to build that understanding and those relationships. And that has definitely been lost because of the way that neighbourhood policing has been sort of dismantled effectively.
You've said a little bit, Danny, about what you'd like to see changed. Changing culture is very, very difficult, though, isn't it? Because what you're effectively doing is trying to get into an individual's mind and change the way they see the world. It's very difficult to get rid of prejudice in some people. How do they do that?
Well, it comes from the top, it comes from the leadership. They've got to set the right example. But there's not just leadership from Sir Mark Rowley and Dame Lynn Owens, his deputy. There's leadership also at superintendent, inspector and sergeant ranks, and that's really missing. That's partly because a lot of experienced officers left the service because of the austerity years. It's partly to do with that. You've got an influx of a huge number of inexperienced officers. I think, something like a third of the workforce have got less than 5 years experience. So there's an issue there. Obviously, it's got to be more representative of the communities that it serves. That will help. But it's really difficult to put a culture in place overnight. It takes years and years to build that up. But it does start with the leadership, and it does start with people calling out when they hear or see things that aren't right, and for those complaints to be taken seriously. And that hasn't happened enough. Hopefully, this report will make clear that that has got to start. I just want to say one other thing, which I think, Louise Casey has sort of highlighted and symbolises, if you like, the fact that violence against women and girls, rape and sexual assault haven't been given the priority. And it's the freezers that she found where samples from victims of rape were kept, that in the heat wave last summer broke down. Lots of rape samples were basically destroyed as a result, couldn't be used, cases collapsed. That, to me, symbolises the lack of care that's been given to local policing and to violence against women and girls. You can talk tough, you can say we've got a new strategy on this, but get the basics right, put the facilities in place. That's a basic, isn't it?
Isn't it? It's horribly incompetent.
If you had the store where the firearms was held that wasn't secure, there would be an outrage about that. Where's the outrage about fridges and freezers?
Thank you, Danny. Danny Shaw there, Justice and Policing commentator.
It's absolutely right about that. It's contemptible for any woman listening to that thinking that rape samples are in a freezer that breaks down during the heat wave, and that also officers put their lunch boxes in the same fridges and freezers, then effectively contaminating the samples because they didn't care.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? They didn't care. They didn't care, and they weren't frightened that somebody in that office was going to hold them to account if they messed up in that way. Leadership. And
what does Louise Casey say in that report? It's got, as Dawn was highlighting, it's got so bad now, rape in, you might as well say it's legal, rape in London.
Don't forget, if you're just joining us, I did an interview yesterday with one of the victims of the Eleanor Williams story. She was the woman who falsely accused some individuals, hit herself in the face with the hammer. The pictures were so shocking. I've spoken to one of her victims. We're going to play you that in just a moment.
Now, if the Tories are going to win the next general election, doesn't look very likely, does it, if you look at the polls, they've got to retain some of those so-called red wall seats across the north of England and the Midlands.
So Don Valley, just outside Doncaster, voted Conservative for the first time in 2019. But in November, Doncaster and Sheffield Airport closed, leaving many locals feeling angry.
So our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has this special report from up there.
Doncaster Airport last November. Thousands protest, angry at the closure of this busy South Yorkshire air hub. Also serving nearby Sheffield, Doncaster boasted daily flights to the US and mainland Europe. Less than 20 years old, this world-class facility now lies dormant. Airport owner the Peel Group says it's financially unviable. Local garage owner Mark Chadwick was shocked when Doncaster Airport closed. He set up a protest group on social media.
You couldn't find out why it was closing, what it was closing for, who was closing it. So I set up a Facebook group just to do something, just to see if we could find out what was happening. The first day we had 1,000 members. The first week we had 4,000 members. It's a travesty what's happened to our local airport.
The online campaign to save Doncaster Sheffield Airport now has over 20,000 followers and rising. This was once RAF Finningley, which for decades hosted fondly remembered air shows as captured in this home movie. The case for Doncaster Airport today rests on its central location, close to Sheffield, Hull and Lincolnshire. Before lockdown, Doncaster boasted 1.4 million passengers in 2019 alone, generating directly and indirectly around 3,000 local jobs. Just 90 minutes by train from the capital, Doncaster could also take pressure off London's busy airports. Business leaders say this closure is a disaster for the local economy.
We're thinking about taxi drivers, the local hotels, bed and breakfast, caterers, all of those small businesses that actually supply the airport.
We're in Don Valley, a red wall seat the Tories won in 2019 and need to retain. The local MP says the Labour-run council and mayor should buy this facility, as happened with Teesside Airport in the northeast.
This is what happened in the north with Ben Houchin. He actually bought it. A Conservative mayor bought the airport and made it work. We need the same thing to happen here.
At Doncaster's Parkland Social Club, locals are adamant their airport should survive.
They don't need a third runway. Is it at Gatwick and Gateshead? So can you have Doncaster? It's the hub of the country.
The Sheffield airport shut down a few years ago, so really Doncaster should have taken up the slack on that. And why it's shutting, I was still a bit mystified of why it's actually closing.
They sell the land for housing and they get more money than selling it as an airport or using it as an airport and keeping it running.
Peel Group refutes this and says the high fixed costs associated with running a safe regulated airport mean a break-even business plan can't be identified for the foreseeable future. Planes haven't landed in Doncaster since November, but the campaign to save this regional hub is in full flight. Liam Halligan, GB News.
That's crazy.
I'm mad.
How can we be letting a facility like that?
I know. Regional airports, really, really important. There was a report in the paper yesterday that airports are poised for massive expansion. Massive expansion.
Crazy.
And there we are. A good regional hub closed down.
Nice that, Liam. Right. Still to come, I spoke to one of the gentlemen who was falsely accused of being the head of an Asian grooming gang by 22-year-old Eleanor Williams. I'm sure you remember that story. Mohammed shared his side of the story with me yesterday. You do not want to miss this.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. For most, a brighter day today compared to yesterday with some sunshine, but there are a few heavy showers around, still pretty mild as well. Weather systems are gathering out in the Atlantic. They're all going to bring spells of rain across the UK. One is clearing away, leaving us, as I say, with a brighter day, but still plenty of showers around over the Midlands and eastern England. Some pretty lively downpours this afternoon. A heavy shower is likely in a few places. Parts of Scotland seeing a scattering of showers. Much of Wales and southwest England will stay dry. Not too many showers here, and we see more persistent rain moving into Northern Ireland by the end of the afternoon. Pretty mild temperatures, mostly getting into the teens when the sun is shining. We could get up to 16 Celsius, but the breeze will be picking up as we go through the day, and it's going to get windy overnight. And not just windy, wet. That rain for Northern Ireland this afternoon spreads to most areas before midnight. Some quite heavy bursts of rain in the west, and the winds will get very gusty, particularly in western Scotland, come first thing on Wednesday morning. It'll be another pretty mild night with some towns and cities in the south staying in double figures. A fairly damp start then across East Anglia and the southeast to Wednesday morning. A very windy start in western Scotland, blustery conditions here, and those gusty winds will spread across northern Scotland with plenty of heavy showers through the day. We'll see some showers developing across parts of Wales and western England, and they'll spread further east come the afternoon. But again, many places actually seeing decent spells of sunshine, but it will be a windy day. Still pretty mild, double figures, maybe 15, 16 across the southeast, but feeling colder with the winds. The winds will ease a touch through Wednesday evening, but further bands of heavy showers coming in from the west, and that sets us up really for the rest of the working week with further spells of showery rain zipping across the country on blustery winds, staying pretty mild as well, but there are some signs of colder conditions spreading south this weekend.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Now, stay tuned for this, really interesting. Our next guest was falsely accused of being the head of an Asian grooming gang by, frankly, a wicked 22-year-old Eleanor Williams, who was sentenced to a mere 8.5 years in prison last week.
Now, you remember this story. It had the shocking images of this young girl who had hit herself in the face with a hammer. Mohammed Ramzan was named by Miss Williams during the investigation as part of her twisted web of lies. And I spoke to him just after yesterday's show on how he was able to protect his family, his businesses and his mental health, all while battling a gruelling investigation period. A warning that some viewers and listeners may find aspects of this interview distressing. Life like before you ever even heard the name Eleanor Williams?
I got life was absolutely brilliant. It was normal. It was good. It was just, you just going on a day by day, living your life, enjoying it.
4 kids,
four children, brilliant partner, enjoying life. Just normal.
So tell us what happened. How did it first come across your desk that you were accused of something that you hadn't done?
Anyway, made the claims. I got arrested in 2019, 7/7.
Out of the blue?
Out of the blue, totally out of the blue. But prior to that, for a year and a half, local, I've had issues, as in like social media going on, and I'm a paedophile enabler. I orchestrate it, and there was... Well, that was just local, and a lot of people knew, and they were just always dismissed. Nobody really cared. They were like the extreme. The few people that are involved in this, they were the extreme far right, and they were just pushing this agenda.
After you were cleared of doing any wrongdoing from their investigations, the mud had stuck by that
yeah.
point.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell us what happened.
Well, you got all these that were just pushing the agenda of that. This is it. It's a mass cover-up, and that was the whole target. Then that became it's a mass cover-up. He's getting away with it. The town's corrupt. The police is corrupt. The council's corrupt. He pays off everything, and that was just like, hang on, are we living in Pakistan?
What was that like for your kids?
It was horrendous for my kids. Absolutely horrendous. And that is at that point, in 2019, we were struggling as it was because my eldest son started self-harming. He dropped out of college because people were calling, and he had one of the ice cream vans, and he was constantly getting called. And people talking about your dad.
It's the worst possible allegation as well, isn't it?
And this is now 2 weeks prior to me getting arrested. I walked in. I'm going to the bathroom, and it's 1:30 in the morning, and his bedroom light's on, and I walked in, and you see your son all cut. It's devastating, it's heartbreaking. Yeah. And we all tried to keep strong by not sharing what we're going through. And just to keep that, some sort of normality
and
at
you're
home.
thinking, it'll be fine. I've not done anything. It'll be okay.
But this is just rumours at the time. Then 2 weeks later, I'm getting arrested. And then a year later, this post goes up. And, business was ruined. It totally ruined. And you just think, wow, what do we do here? And then obviously the police get involved, and you've got all the death threats. I've got messages like people were saying, we're going to rape your wife in front of your kids, and then we're going to burn your house, right? My addresses got published out there in social media. My picture was almost from social media was everywhere, and you just got to have eyes on the back of your head.
You lost your parents as well, did you, during this time?
My father, my mother, and my father-in-law in the midst of all this. And my nephew died in the M1 car crash last year.
The police had cleared your name quite rightly from any wrongdoing, and yet your life was still hell.
Well, prior to the post, when that went up, they did a thorough investigation, multiple agencies. Some inspector came out and did a live interview saying there's no grooming gang in thing. We've done a 2-year thorough multi-agencies investigation into Barrow offence. There's no such thing of it. But
what was the relationship like with you and the other accused men?
I had no relationship with them.
You're not friends with them? You're not all...
No, now. Just a couple of days before Christmas, I reached out to Jordan. Supporting him. It's the same as my son. Right. And what he's been through is horrendous. My 18-year-old, just listening to the abuse, he was going through so much. And him having to be now, for 73 days, you're in a sex offenders...
So this is the guy that was actually remained in custody.
Yeah.
Now he, I suppose, didn't have your resources, your fight, your determination.
No.
And so he got swept into that system without anybody there to defend him.
And yet, look at that. They had him in remand when they arrested me. Why couldn't they have linked the dots then and understood, hang on, we've already got this gentleman being accused by Eleanor Williams. We've got another one a few years earlier that's been accused, and now an Asian grooming gang has appeared out of nowhere. How could they actually not see what was happening? And is this why Barrow Police Station, they refused me, because Barrow Police Station, there's some discrepancies, or there's incompetence somewhere that's taken place.
How do you feel now, having been through this horrendous experience that you and your family have been through, about people who are accused of sexual offence allegations retaining their anonymity until a time in which they're found guilty?
I think that's a must. 100%. It needs to be, because it's safeguarded. It's what we went through as a family, Jordan, and how the exposure goes and how much damage that does to a person. And if you're not, it's guilty till proven innocent, or is it innocent till proven guilty? Which way is it? But till not being sentenced or verdicts or being proven, you can't, because what damage it does. And there's people have taken their lives. I attempted suicide. Jordan did. Cameron Bibby did, because the names were out there and they were innocent people. And how can you do that? And it's a mud sticks. There's always be a certain minority that will say yes.
What do you think about the sentence that she got?
Obviously, I'm going to say not long enough, but it was the judge's decision. We, as a family, were happy as soon as we got the guilty verdict. That was good enough for us. And if the judge think that was fair sentence, it is. But one of my questions is with this. It should have been a bit more. It should have been a bit sterner in a way to set more of an example. But when she's released, where's she going to go? Is any man, your son, my son, any children, any men, wherever she goes, are we safe? I just want to know, when she's released, I hope we're consulted. And safeguarding measures are put in place. And she's monitored.
Yeah. Mohammed, thank you. Thank you so much for talking to us as well. I think it's a really important story, and you raised so many fascinating issues. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's a belting story and a belting interview, and it's a flipping scandal. And actually, that woman should be in prison for a lot longer than 8.5 years. And it's a scandal her flipping mother has hung on to the, what is it, £23,000 crowdfunding. That money was to give that girl a new home, away from the town where she'd made all these vile, poisonous allegations.
Well, we want to put a longer version of that on the GB News website, because there was, obviously there's only so much we can show you this morning because we've got so much news to get through, but he also talked about the fact that her mother is a Labour councillor.
Yes, she is.
There's a Conservative MP in Barry-in-Furness, and, you know, he suggested that this story has kept going because it made the Conservative MP in the area reflected badly on him. Yeah. It's an extraordinary story. He's also talking to Netflix about making a drama about it.
Well, it's an extraordinary story. I mean, the ice cream man, and who'd have thought it?
Yeah, when he mentioned ice cream vans, if you're a bit confused about what he meant, one of his family businesses was running ice creams, and there's ice cream vans. There's a lot of cash money to be made in ice cream vans, and there was some turf wars, and that was partly the initial trigger.
Yeah. Now, still to come up, US police forces, they're on high alert. Guess what? Donald Trump, of course it's him. He may be arrested, probably not, but you never know. Would he be the first US president to face criminal charges? We'll find out after your morning's news with Tamsin.
Andrew, thank you. It's 11:34. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. A scathing report into Britain's largest police force has found it to be institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. Baroness Louise Casey, who led the review into the Metropolitan Police, is warning victims have been let down and that officers who abuse their power have shattered public trust. Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley has said he's sorry and that this must be a catalyst for change. The report also found the Met's current ethics standards and disciplinary procedures have failed abysmally, and Baroness Casey is calling for a complete overhaul.
The moment that Sarah Everard was abducted, raped and then murdered by a serving police officer, I find it extraordinary that in policing and in the Met Police, that wasn't their moment of like a plane falling out of the sky. I just think it is so dreadful. Change didn't come. So now this report has to carry that and has to take responsibility for getting the change needed.
The sister of a head teacher who took her own life after an Ofsted inspection says her death was a direct result of the deeply harmful report and the pressure of the process. Ruth Perry was the head at Caversham Primary School in Reading. She killed herself in January while awaiting the review, which gave the school the lowest possible rating. The inspection report found the school to be good in every category, apart from leadership and management, where it was judged to be inadequate. The Transport Secretary is calling on the RMT union to give its members a vote on the latest pay offer from rail operators, so next week's strikes can be called off. It's after members of the union who work for Network Rail accepted a similar pay rise of between 9.2% and 14.4%. Industrial action is planned by the RMT for next Thursday and Saturday. On TV, online, DAB plus radio and tune in. This is GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Still to come, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is on trial, accused of eating cake in lockdown, but then lying about the fact that he knew he'd broken the rules.
Yeah, I still don't think he ate the cake. His birthday cake, which was made for him by Carrie's wife, and I don't think it ever came out the Tupperware box.
If he's cleared of any wrongdoing, would you welcome a comeback from him? We're also going to have another round of debates with Dawn Neeson and John McTernan. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning, it's 11:40. You're with To The Point on GB News.
We're moving to America.
Oh, I wish we were.
Yeah. Which part would you go to?
Florida, Ron DeSantis.
I think I'd
Freedom,
go to
wall to wall.
No. The former president, Donald Trump, could be arrested today.
That's right. He could be set to face charges over claims that he'd paid adult film star Stormy Daniels to keep quiet about the affair that they had allegedly.
But breaking news, Boris Johnson has finally published this 60-page report, which is the basis of his defence in the partygate inquiry. He's going to be before the partygate committee for 4 hours tomorrow, chaired by our friend John McTernan here, former advisor to Tony Blair, Harriet Harman, and our lovely Dawn Neeson, who's a great friend of the programme, former editor of The Star. So it's been published. We're going to bring it in, waving a bit of paper. You don't think it matters a fig what he says in that 60-page document, do you?
Well, I think what he says in that 60-page document, I'm just flicking through it on my phone now, is a big boy did it and he ran away. Somebody else advised me. It wasn't me. It's like, do you need advice to be told that you're in a party, walking through a party, having a drink at a party, somebody's leaving party, leaving drinks are a party? I think that's the issue. It's like, it's never Boris's fault. Whatever happens, it's nothing to do with him. Even when he is the man who wrote the rules, the man who told us to obey the rules, the man who, we know from the WhatsApp messaging, who was part of a cabal of politicians telling the police to get extra tough. There was a van went through my park shouting at people.
Yeah, I hated that part of the WhatsApp message.
Telling people to get off their benches.
They politicised the police in this.
They did. They politicised the police.
But you see, the thing is, John, like with those WhatsApp messages, and Donna, whether you examine them in the minutiae of detail that I did, was that Boris was a passenger to some extent. He was having his strings pulled by Whitty and Vallance and Hancock and Cummings, and Boris is kind of going, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? So maybe his defence is he didn't know.
You know what? I think you might have a point there, because I've always been of the opinion that Boris actually lets whatever wife was married to at the time keep his testicles in her handbag. So I think Boris will always use that defence of like, oh my God, did I? I didn't know. It wasn't my fault. It was always someone else's fault. And to be fair to the man, what else can he say in this situation? He has to come up with something.
But he was Prime Minister, therefore the buck stops at the top.
I ran a national newspaper. The buck stopped with me, and I admitted that. And if I did something wrong, I held my hands up to it. But Boris is a very, very different
you're a
creature.
woman. Like, I wonder whether there's a different leadership style here, gentlemen.
Yes, I wonder.
Dawn is not and never has looked like a greased piglet.
Thank
which is
you
what
very
we call,
much.
which is
yes,
what
Sunday mornings come back to me a bit on that one, maybe. But
that was one of the great criticisms of David Cameron of Boris Johnson. How the greased piglet always wriggles free.
Yeah, in this, well, he's trying to wriggle free, and I think Dawn's absolutely right. What he's trying to say is, how can you blame me? I was only in charge.
Yeah,
I'm not responsible. I was just the boss. And it's like, okay, and you then have to say, I don't make decisions. I'm not responsible for the decisions that were made. But he does say that he apologises. He does say, though, however, he didn't recklessly or intentionally mislead the House on the 1st December 2021, 8th December 2021. But he does say, of course, he apologised on the 25th.
We're going to we're brandishing a bit of paper here, Bev and I, because this is, I think, the nub. Point 4. Boris Johnson says, I accept the House of Commons was misled by my statements that the rules and guidance had been followed completely at number 10. But when the statements were made, here we go, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time. I did not intentionally or recklessly mislead the House on December the 23rd, other dates, or any other date. I would never have dreamed of doing so.
We have to prove now, not we personally, but they have to prove that he knowingly
and recklessly
lied.
What does recklessly mean?
Well, I mean, yeah.
That's going to be a lawyer's... the lawyer's going to have a field day with that word, Dawn.
Well, I mean, most of them involved are barristers, aren't they? Which would be forensic. But you have to prove that he knowingly did it, and I don't know...
Lawyers have no right to speak on this.
No, but he's got...
No, Parliament's the highest court in the land.
Yes, of course, but he's got sitting next to him one of the cleverest lawyers in the country, David Pannick, has Boris Johnson, and I think quite rightly paid for by the taxpayer, who will be whispering in his ear the whole time.
I think it would be interesting if we knew which lawyers refused to take that brief, and I think it'd be really interesting if we understood why it is. It's not a government lawyer, it's not a Treasury solicitor, it's some bloke brought in off the streets. I reckon this is one of those classic occasions when we get a council's opinion, you speak to somebody and they go, you don't want to ask me, you want to ask this guy. If this was a proper government, taxpayer paid, government advice, it should be a government solicitor.
Pannick is one of our most distinguished King's counsel.
Not in this field of administrative law, regulatory law.
It's about the truth, isn't it?
No, it's not. This is a...
Well,
it's not about the truth.
It should be about the truth.
Oh, my God.
Why not use a
former
government
Blair
lawyer?
advisor says it's not about the truth.
No. What government... What I'm telling you, government lawyers refused to take this case because they wouldn't say what Boris wanted. That's what KCs do. KCs give you the opinion you pay for. This is an opinion... Why didn't, if he's being supported as Prime Minister, why the government's not supporting him?
Pannick is a distinguished Casey. He's also in the House of Lords. He's part of the establishment job.
Exactly.
The irony, though, I mean, the irony of us spending all this time discussing whether a politician lied in the House of Commons. Like, could this not be somebody's full-time job assessing politicians lying in the House of Commons? This is the
more than one person.
Exactly. Every single day there's somebody of any particular political hue standing up when they're not baying at each other like spoilt brats. And this is the problem, Dawn, is people are so disillusioned with British politics. And this kind of incident does the whole establishment so much harm.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And I'm very wary talking about politicians in sweeping generalisation, because I think it is profoundly wrong to demonise all politicians. We've seen the horrific consequences of that with Joe Cox and David Amess. So I think we have to be very careful about demonising all politicians here. But you are right. I mean, I think actually the general public out there now don't believe a word what any of them say, no matter what political party they represent.
Absolutely.
Here's another thought, Dawn. Look, we've had the Sue Gray report. Within weeks of Sue Gray, she was the distinguished civil servant who's a paragon of impartiality.
She was having a beer and a curry with Keir.
Who's now going to go and work for Keir Starmer. That's how impartial she is. She did her report within a month. Boris had gone. He's resigned. He's not the Prime Minister. What more is to be served, you could argue, by this?
Look, personally, I think we should... Look, if we didn't know that Boris Johnson was a liar and that appalling things went on during the lockdown, you know, they were writing rules that were breaking them left, right and centre. Politicians of all colours were doing the same. So if we didn't know that, then we are stupid and we deserve the politicians we get. But how much money are we wasting on this?
Oh,
There's so much money that...
This is because you lot want him out, the Commons. Boris is still a very charismatic politician. If only Keir Starmer had an ounce of his charisma.
Labour has got 200 MPs in the House of Commons. Labour doesn't boss the House of Commons. This is the House of Commons, which is massive majority Tory MPs, deciding that they want to take this issue up with Boris Johnson. Tory MPs chucked him out.
It was a committee.
Tory MPs chucked him out. Tory MPs are a majority on this committee, and this is a situation where Boris does not contest the fact that the rules were broken, nor does he contest the fact that he misled Parliament. He's trying to say, well, it may have been a lie, but it wasn't. I didn't think it was a lie when I said it was a lie.
Well, the rules were ridiculous. Colin has said, will someone please mention that Boris was at work, which required him to mix with other people who were involved in the running of the country.
But not to drink.
But the thing is, they created these irrational, illogical, satirical rules. Do you remember? Tier 1, Tier 2, with your mates, with a Scotch egg.
Downing Street is not normally a workplace where people drink. As Damien McBride said...
Really?
Damien McBride said, you know, when he was drinking, and he had a drink problem, he admits he had a drink problem, he said...
He was an advisor, of course, to Gordon Brown.
He used to have to go out to drink.
The Red Lion.
Nobody had beer fridges when I worked in Number 10. This culture of drinking and partying was brought in by...
During Partygate. During Partygate.
It was brought in by...
It was because they were working 20-hour days.
You don't have to drink.
So can I just ask, though, if it comes down to what you've got in your... Sorry, if it comes down to what you've got in your glass or your cup, as it did with us lot in pubs, remember, you could stand there having a coffee, but you couldn't have a beer, as long as you had a Scotch egg or something or other. If it comes down to what you're drinking, how comes Keir Starmer was at a work meeting with a beer and that was fine?
And pizza.
Because the rule...
Don't forget the pizza.
I thought it was a curry, wasn't it?
Was it a curry? Oh, it was curry.
The rules were investigated twice by the Durham Police, but also this was a different part of the lockdown, a later part of the lockdown. There were very different rules there, and all the rules were actually stuck to, and that's why actually the police said, after 2 investigations, they were stuck to. It's why NHS England said that the rules were stuck to, because they were consulted about.
I wonder how Rishi Sunak feels about all this, because, of course, he got the fixed penalty notice for breaking the rules. No one's talking about that. He got in trouble recently for letting his dog off a lead in Hyde Park as well. He's been in trouble with the police more recently.
And not wearing a seatbelt.
Not wearing a seatbelt.
And not wearing a seatbelt.
He got a second penalty fine for that, didn't he? Penalty point.
Let's face it, they're not the most heinous crimes in the world, are they? I mean, letting your dog off the lead, but, I mean, but he was at the party.
Yeah.
When you're
didn't look much of a party to me. And let me tell you, if ever you're having a party like that at Dawn, don't bother inviting me.
No.
Take in a Tupperware dish.
My parties are not like that, believe me.
I bet, actually.
When you're the rule maker,
what's the
you
dress
have to be
code?
the rule taker, and that's the thing. It's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
In the end, there's no great... I mean, maybe be a liar, but if you're a politician, maybe everybody thinks you're a liar. I think it's the hypocrisy that really deals with people, and I think that's the... And that the British public will never, ever like it.
Now, you advised a Prime Minister who, Bev said very passionately, lied over the Iraq War because it is the 20th anniversary. You were there at the time. You are about the only person I know, John, who defends that appalling misadventure, the worst foreign policy adventure since Suez, I would say.
Every war against a fascist dictator is a good war.
Well,
war against
see what was repeated. Yeah, just There was a democracy after. Hang on, when Galtieri was brought down after the Falklands War, a democracy took place in Argentina. There's no democracy in Iraq. Now, how would you advise Boris Johnson if you were in number 10 before he goes into that committee tomorrow?
Well, he's not in number 10, but if
you were advising him,
how would I advise him? I'd say, be humble and throw yourself on the mercies of the court.
Good luck with that one.
Even if it means then losing his seat in Uxbridge, because I can guarantee the people of Uxbridge do not care at the moment that he's done this. He's their MP.
Yeah, you know what? The people of Uxbridge will vote in a Labour candidate at the by-election because the people of Uxbridge have decided, like the people of London, and like the people of England, like the people of the UK, they're done with this government.
I'm not sure they think Labour is any better, John.
This government is finished. When the Labour Party has got a 20-point lead,
did you see the poll yesterday?
I don't think you're wrong.
20-point lead. This government is done. The votes are just waiting on their verandas with their baseball bats to deliver a punishment beating.
What? Can we use that sort of language in
I'm not being encouraged. On their verandas. There's not that many verandas in Uxbridge.
There's new Labour for you. That's new Labour for you. Very middle class. Very middle class. Is it while they're sipping their Chablis that they wield the baseball bats?
Can we talk about...
If you let the voters wait too long, they hurt you more.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of disillusioned, dissatisfied people who are politically homeless. Right, can we talk about the Crown, please? On a slightly lighter note, but not that light in this occasion. This is the drama, if you're not familiar with it, about the royal family. You'd be surprised. Big Netflix drama, cost millions and millions to make. And it is a, how would you describe it? Well, it is biographical. It's a biopic of the royal family. That's the word I'm looking for.
But takes liberties with the facts.
Takes liberties with the facts.
It's a drama.
It speculates that. And in the latest filming that we've seen pictures of at Elstree Studios, they have reenacted, to some degree, Dawn, the crash in which Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed died. A lot of people are saying this is too close to home, it is distasteful, it's all very well talking about Queen Victoria or the young Queen Elizabeth II, but this is too close to the bone.
It's a drama. It's acted. I was lucky enough to interview Diana. You know, I am not offended. I am not upset. It's a huge part of the story, of the drama that became the royal family's life. We have to. It's not a documentary. We have to separate the two things. It's like you can never make a drama about, and there've been plenty about the Second World War and show the horrors that went on then. But it's a drama.
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
At the end of the day.
I think
it's not a secret that Princess Diana died in a car crash, and there were pictures of a crashed car after she died in a car crash. And this is a story about there's people who've seen a crashed car that's been used in the filming.
It's on Netflix, and who has taken millions and millions and millions of pounds from Netflix? Princess Diana's son, Prince Harry, and that wife of his, the Duchess of Sussex. Taking a fortune.
They're great people.
They're not great
people.
I
like
a bad word.
And these are also the people wanting the gender-neutral, gender-fluid thing, who are insisting on their kids being Prince and Princess.
Harry?
Right, John McTurnan, Dawn Neeson, lovely to have you here this morning. It has flown by again. We're back tomorrow.
We are.
We'll be back.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. For most, a brighter day today compared to yesterday with some sunshine, but there are a few